The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our monthly webinar series. My name is Todd Ladiolis. I'm the Prevention and Policy Administrator for the Governor's Child Sex Trafficking team. And today we are really thrilled to be joined by Rebecca Bender. A lot of you may have seen Rebecca's work before or seen her at conferences. She is really well respected across the country. She's an amazing survivor leader. And, as we try to do in Texas, we hope that all good things come to Texas. And we're fortunate that that just happens to be the case with Rebecca. So she has graciously agreed to join us for this series and just tell us a little bit more about the Rebecca Bender Initiative and about the work that she is doing. And we're excited to hear about some of the ways that we'll have to partner here in Texas now that she's here. So I don't want to take up too much of the time, but a couple of quick housekeeping things. You all, as attendees, are automatically muted so that we don't have a bunch of background noise during the webinar. But you do have an opportunity to enter any questions that you have into the question box. We'll do our best to reserve time at the end to get to those questions. And Rebecca mentioned that she wants to save actually quite a bit of time for that. So don't hold back if you have questions about the work or want her opinion and expertise on anything. And I will be back at the end to help field some questions and also to talk about briefly our next webinar in this series. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. I was so excited and honored when you asked me to come share, and I'm really excited to get to know everyone here on the call today. And we were talking earlier before we went live, and I told Todd, I said, an hour is a long time to talk about yourself. So I'm hopeful that as we dive into maybe some areas that I'm working on, that I'm just going to share probably more in detail than I normally would, so that it fosters topics of discussion for you guys and ways that we can help you grow in the areas that you're fighting in. And there's so many different ways that you can fight human trafficking, and that's why all of us are needed at the table, is because we all bring skill sets and professions and giftings to a variety of ways to intercept. And so I'm hopeful that you're gonna be ready with questions. I really want to make sure to get through those. So I'm just going to share a little bit more about the Rebecca Bender Initiative and what we do. Let me advance my slide. Here we go. So I am what's known as a survivor leader. I'm not sure how many the varying backgrounds that are on the call today, but what that means is that someone has lived through a life of human trafficking and has gone back to help in some regard. Now, some people call it a lived expert, some call it survivor leader. This is a term that it varies. We're not a monolithic group. We all like different titles. And so the best thing you can do in working with someone with lived experience is to just simply ask them what their preferred title is. I'm also the CEO and founder of the Rebecca Bender Initiative, and I'm a subject matter expert and consultant. So we do lots of work with district attorneys' offices and law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, on how to identify human trafficking and what some of the makeup is in regards to that, the legal lines, and how we can both advocate for victims in a court setting, as well as take the stand and testify at actual trials on tactics employed by traffickers dependent on typology of exploitation, right? So whether it's gang trafficking, what do gang members do? How do gang members move victims? How do gang members recruit? How do gang members use force, fraud, or coercion that might be different to an illicit massage parlor? Or they might move money differently in an IMP than they would in a gang. They might have varying money laundering tactics that could be some red flags for financial institutions versus street prostitution or truck stops or cantinas or labor trafficking. There's so many different typologies that we have to start, I think, as leaders, and I know a lot of you that are logging in you're leading in your cities and your communities. We have to do our own kind of deep dives to carry that mantle of leadership, to help people really understand what some of those nuances are. Because when we start speaking in such broad force, fraud, or coercion, if it's an adult, and just not if it's a minor, it's almost too broad, and we have to really help dive in if that's a lane you're interested in, and in terms of identifying tactics employed by traffickers, both on the grooming, recruitment, and the ending. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit more about what I do in terms of subject matter expert. And I love working with other nonprofits and finding ways to help build capacity and build collaborative efforts in communities. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big Texas fan. Been trying to get here for years and finally made it. So what we do at the Rebecca Bender Initiative is we have two real main initiatives. We have our initiative, which we call Equip, and another one that we call Elevate. And those are really the two ways that we empower communities and survivors through those two core initiatives. With our Equip initiative, it's really all about training. We do a lot of trainings. We have trained well over 100,000 first responders. That's FBI, Homeland Security, vice schools, chief of police associations, medical professionals, emergency medical staff. Anywhere where there's different state or regional conferences, we really try our best to be there and to be a part, whether it's me or another survivor leader that's on our team, or we refer out to other survivors that are in that community so they can bring, their own lived expertise, both professionally and experientially, to that conference. Some of the other things we do, though, is we put together lots of different trainings online. We really want to help educate the general public. There's so many misconceptions out there with fighting human trafficking right now. We really want to be a place where people can come for truth, where we can help you sort through the headlines, we can help you sort through the press releases, and we can really get you the truth, what the root of core values are to the field, what that means to be a good ally. And we want to help to really minimize sensationalism, because it really fuels misidentification. That's something that we really believe for a long time, is that fueling sensationalism fuels misidentification. And then what that ends up doing is it pulls us backwards in terms of helping victims be identified or self-identifying. Or what I'm learning here in Texas is also it helps what the term outcry I hear used here a lot. I haven't heard it in a lot of other states. So it's been kind of neat to pick up on kind of how things work in terms of processes. But we want victims to be able to, survivors or active survivors, we want them to be able to outcry. We want them to self-identify. So if we're sensationalizing an issue and showing only kidnapped kids in minivans, then when someone is being exploited, they might not outcry because they're thinking, well, my situation doesn't look like that, so I must not be being trafficked. And we tend to self-blame, which is really common in trauma, and especially groups that are highly marginalized and at risk. We're targeted, and so we tend to not realize that, I think, until much further on in our healing journeys. So our goal to equip communities is not just the community professionals, although we know that that's important, and clearly we put a lot of work into that, but we also really constantly are trying to churn out just resources for the general public, facts, e-courses, interactive quizzes. I mean, sometimes it's as small as a free quiz that we want you to take to find your lane and identify your place in the trafficking field. It's a free 20-question quiz, and it tells you kind of what your personality matches with, all the way to some really advanced, 2-day intensive trainings in person for vice, so it runs the gamut, and we just really want to be able to change culture with some of our educational tools. These are a couple of topics and trainings that we offer. We have an evolution of exploitation training, which just teaches on the culture of the human trafficking field, the values, how to be a good ally. I liken it to the game of soccer. I'm a soccer player, and so I think of being on a soccer field, when I'm yelling to my teammate, up line, cut in, fall back, my teammate knows what that means. And so we have a shared language and a shared goal, which is to move the ball upfield. And although there's multiple players on the team, we're working together by sharing, common insight on the game and the rules and the lingo, because we have a common mission. And so the evolution of exploitation is really to help teach what some of those things are as you step and continue to be a player on the field. We want us to all work together with a collective mission to move the needle forward in this fight. So we offer this to nonprofits. We offer this to leaders that want to learn more about the history of the social justice movement and also the core values and the language. We also do an advanced law enforcement training. It's 2-day, pretty in-depth, identifying culpability, typologies, tactics, moving money, all the varying things. And then we have the online Find Your Lane. It's not just the fun quiz, but then we also have, if you choose after the quiz to take the class, you can watch very short videos per lane. So I think they're like 5 to 8 minutes, and there's 9 lanes. So if you want to, I just kind of brain dump for 5 to 8 minutes on all about prevention. Everything I've ever learned about prevention in 13 years, I dump it into this 5 to 8 minute video. It's clearly not like an intensive class. There could be more on it, but we wanted to just get people started somewhere. We hear a lot, I'm sure all of you do too, of like, no, I want to get involved, but I don't know where to begin. We say, start here with Find Your Lane. Just learn very briefly about these 9 different ways to fight trafficking. And it's not an extensive list. I'm sure there's more if we wanted to really dive more thoroughly into it. But what are the 9 ways? And then what does each thing look like? If you wanted to fight prevention, what does that look like? What does that mean? How would you get started? Where would you learn about the resources that exist? I got a prevention curriculum put into several high schools in the state of Oregon where I lived, and that was no easy task. And I learned what not to do, and I learned when I put my foot in my mouth. And but today I can say that we probably have at least 3 or 4 high schools in the county that I lived in that have prevention curriculum in the school district. And I learned a lot from trying to figure out how to do that. I also learned that prevention maybe isn't the thing that I'm called to, but my goal in the Find Your Lane course is that it took me a really long time to find what I was passionate about and what I was good at. And I wanted to be able to take that experience and bring it back to others so that you don't quit too soon, because we really need you in this fight. The other couple trainings real quick is just our Trafficking Truths. It's our Mythbuster campaign. We launched this earlier last year when the Wayfair, media taglines hit the news. And I had posted a picture on Instagram of one of the first ads of me when I was being trafficked, and wanted to share some truth about how traffickers move victims. And I got, a lot of people were saying thank you. And mainly the negative people were saying that's just your one experience. And so I took that, and instead of personalizing it, I thought, well, I'll just bring on lots of other people with other experience then, because it's not just me that's saying this. It's all of the experts across the nation were saying, please stop sharing misinformation. And so I emailed about 15 pretty high up people in varying departments all across the nation, thinking maybe I'd get clearance from 3 to 5 to do some interviews. And we got clearance from every single one, 15 experts. I'm talking about the ambassador to the White House, John Cotton Richmond, FBI. We had a whole entire undercover unit come on in masks, like in disguise. I was shocked at the amount of clearance we got to interview and record and distribute. So this Trafficking Truths myth busting campaign is 7 top myths, and it's a video series and a curriculum. The Trafficking Truths is free. You're welcome to download that, watch it anytime you'd like, and there's lots of resources in the handout as well. And then the last thing is our Activist Academy, and we're launching this really soon. We've been working on it. One of the things I've found in finding my lane is I take real complex topics and can sometimes break them down into, bite-sized chunks. It's not always, but I try. And so when I see something, I instantly think in curriculums, right? Like, oh, I could make a 5-point on that. And so I've noticed that, we churn out kind of trainings and curriculum. So we're going to launch this Activist Academy to help people really become an advocate and get a certification and really learn how to be an activist and an advocate and fight trafficking in your community in whichever lane you see fit. Hopefully you guys are chatting in some questions about your own lane or about the work you're doing in one of those lanes. This isn't just questions about us and our work, but we want to help you get the tools or direction into tools that are going to really help you in your field. Okay, so I think this is my next slide. Yep. So these are some tools and resources that we've been working on in a variety of committees and councils that I am, really honored to serve on. I got to be a part of the OVC TAC, which is the Office of Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center. It's a mouthful, but we call it OVC TAC. And at OVC, I was honored to be a part of a pilot program with a whole bunch of other survivor leaders from across the country, where we created this toolkit called toolkit for building survivor-informed organizations. And this has been one of the most incredible resources for nonprofits that want to engage survivor leadership. There's this ladder of survivor engagement, whether it's this beginning rung, which is, all the way up to, really mature inclusion. And there's so many varying levels and degrees of that. This toolkit really helps you if you're wanting to become more survivor informed, more engaged with lived experienced experts, giving you feedback on programs and curriculum. There's a lot of resources in there to do that. So I wanted to share that. Also, was really excited to be a part of the National Advisory Council to Congress a couple years ago. We had been working on a toolkit, a team of, I think there's about 20 of us, maybe 22 of us that were appointed to this position. And it's a 5-year commitment. And within our 3rd year, we would get together throughout the year, we'd convene, and we would go through these 12 categories in our country, and we would start really combing through. And when we were done with our toolkit, which just came out last year, there was 127 recommendations for that's going to be presented to Congress on ways that we can change different state laws and policies. And then I wrote a couple books that I just put here. Of course, small shameless plug for my memoir, In Pursuit of Love, which came out last January. So just had a book birthday. And then Roadmap to Redemption and Elevate are really workbooks for survivors. We see them used in a lot of faith-based safe homes all across the country. Really shocked by that. And if I'm really honest, I wrote Roadmap to Redemption probably way too early in my recovery. Part of my own learning curve as a survivor leader is to help survivors know when they're ready to really process their trauma publicly. Because in the beginning, I just remember not really having the verbiage to what I had been through, or I hadn't had time to process some of the memories with, a specialized therapist. And so I would just share. And later on, years later, I thought, gosh, I can't believe I said it like that. Or I would never word it like that today. I think in the very beginning of my recovery, going public with my story, I actually used to share, this is literally what I said. I was forced into prostitution, but trafficking is reserved for kidnapped children. I still, as a speaker, was having a really hard time processing what I was seeing on the TV versus what my lived experience had been. And it took a documentary, actually is Nefarious, from Exodus Cry, that really helped me to see that trafficking in America looked different, but it was because of the culture that we live in a developed kind of first world country, that it just looked different than what I had imagined from the movies. And that's when sensationalism became kind of a soapbox for me, and something I'm really passionate about, because I know firsthand that it made me not ask for help when I was in the middle of danger. It made me not realize that I was getting into really dangerous situations because I kept picturing trafficking as someone showing up to kidnap me. I kept picturing trafficking as slaves in the basement. I hear that, and I'm just like, it fuels such a misperception that the victim in their victimization is going to have a really hard time self-identifying, and sometimes takes years later to actually be able to self-identify as a victim of human trafficking. And so Roadmap to Redemption was written probably a little too early in my recovery. And so I'm shocked that it's still used in jails and safe homes, anywhere where there's a faith-based component, because it is a faith-based book. Okay, we're also, after this webinar, we're going to send out an email to all attendees with both of these toolkits attached in PDF form. So you'll have both the OVC TTAC toolkit as well as the recommendations. And then I wanted to just give a small plug right here for the Office of Trafficking in Persons, which is who does the Congressional Advisory Committee. This is a webinar that they have coming out. I put the URL there on the screen, so you can take a screenshot, you can write it down, whatever works for you. These are the 12 categories that the Congressional Toolkit developed. And so all of us 22 people on the council, I think 2 or 3 of us took at each category, and we'll be sharing just on that one specific category because the toolkit was just released, coming up in the next few weeks. So if you're into screening and identification, please join us on February 22nd. You can go register from that one URL on the right-hand side. What this is going to do is it's going to have, even though it's only 2 or 3 representations from the council, it's going to be able to share with you everything that the subcommittee went through, what those specific recommendations are and why, and he'll be able to answer lots of questions. So great resource and opportunity to just hear from, you know, national experts on these specific subcategories and why the changes, why the recommendations. And again, if you look through that, you can see, feel free to take a screenshot, you can see which topics are there that might align with the areas that you're invested in and are fighting in. Service provision, judiciary, research and data, MDRs. You know, I love a good MDT, and I'm very grateful to be joining them here in Texas. I was a part of the Department of Justice multiple disciplinarian team, the MDT up in Oregon, and I think that the IACP, the International Chief of Police Association, put out a really phenomenal toolkit on MDTs last year. So lots of great resources in these webinars. All right, with that, the other part of moving here to Texas was my honor and privilege to partner with New Friends, New Life. They are a phenomenal drop-in center and youth resource center in the Dallas County area. And they are doing really great work with both minors and adults, serving, you know, between almost 375 survivors a year. And really excited to take all of these varying trainings that we just went through from the equip component and help bring them to the communities that we serve in Dallas County, and also to be able to bring survivor leadership and workshops to the graduates and alumni that are coming out of those programs. Really excited about our partnership with New Friends, New Life. And so then that kind of leads us, speaking of survivor leadership, to our second initiative, which is called Elevate Academy. Elevate Academy is currently the largest online school for survivors of human trafficking probably out there that I know of. We have 866 students spanning well over 400 US cities and 12 countries. And you can see on our map, which is maybe, this map is a little, maybe 2 months old. The numbers are accurate, but the map I just hadn't redone. But you can see that Texas is actually our #1 state. I think we're well over that now. I think we're in maybe 112. Can't remember off the top of my head, but Texas is our #1 state of enrollment, which it was cool when we moved here. We're like, well, this is great because it's our largest state of enrollment for our students, and excited to continue to partner with lots of organizations that want to bring more survivor engagement and survivor leadership into their programs or into their transitional or drop-in centers. All of our classes are free to survivors, helps them just kind of start going after their dreams and helping survivors to really create tangible action plans to go after their goals. This is, there we go. This is a little bit more about just what we offer there at Elevate. We have 6 classes right now. We're constantly adding more. So we offer things like deeper levels of healing, finding your specialty, learning how to share your story, page to published, what it's like to not just write a book, but also op-ed pieces and articles and brochures, and helping with blogs and engaging from your own lived experience with opportunities that are out there to let your voice be heard. We also every student gets 4 individual coaching sessions. They get mentors. They are given all the curriculum for these classes, and they have a community of other survivors that they can talk to, you know, for the rest of their lives. One of the things I've noticed is it's not just sometimes community discussions that come up within a scheduled topic, but questions that come up for the rest of your life when you're done with classes. It's great to be in a facility and a drop-in center in a transitional place where you're in that stage of your journey. But what happens when, you know, you've come really far and you're living on your own and you've got your first job and it's going great and you feel ready to start dating again? And what does that look like for a survivor to put themselves out there? And what's happened if maybe you've shared a couple things from an article or you've spoken at an event and the person that you're going on dates with Googles you and your name comes up, and how do you navigate that? And these are community groups where you kind of get to talk about different situations like that, all the way to marriage. You know, we've had survivors that they're getting married and they've gotten married and things come up in marriage. We all know, anyone who's married on here knows, you know, marriage is it's amazing and it's work. And when you've been through trauma and you've been exploited, a variety of things can come up in a marriage that you weren't even thinking about back when you were in transitional housing. And so that long-term continual community and resources and mentors and coaches for the rest of your life is really beneficial, not just in that economic empowerment portion, but then the community and benevolence far after that. These are the 7 steps that we take in our academy towards economic empowerment for survivors. We're continually adding classes like budgeting and career exploration, professional development, leadership development. You know, we do some things already with the with these topics woven into our existing curriculum, but wanting to continue to expand as topics grow and really, you know, do a deep dive, 3 to 4 modules on just this one section. So we're excited to continue to add new topics all the time for the economic empowerment. All right, I'm almost done. So then we'll be getting to questions. Look at that. And so this is where you can reach out and connect with us. Sorry, I'm moving my control panel around. So if you see my mouse moving, it's just so I can read. This is where we're usually on social media here. And those are both of our email addresses, both with the connection at New Friends, New Life, if you're interested in learning more about our partnerships and strategic ways that we want to collaborate in the Dallas County area and Fort Worth and the Metroplex. And then both of the websites, if you have survivors that you'd like to refer to Elevate, they can go to elevate-academy.org, click join now, they fill out an application, and it's a pretty simple process from there. So that's about it. On the Rebecca Bender website, you can sign up for our newsletter, and we put out all of the different toolkits and resources that we just talked about, and all the different classes we share about every month in our newsletter. So you're welcome to join that and get some more updated information every time we come out with something we put out in our newsletter. So I'd love to start answering some questions. I kind of blew through that quickly, but really want to be able to help you ask questions that you have for your program or your community, or even one of the 9 to 12 areas that we talked about earlier with the lanes, or the areas from the toolkit. If you're in one of the fighting in one of those specific arenas, would love to answer any questions or have you talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. You nailed it. You said, I think I'm going to take about 30 minutes to talk about this, and we'll have time for questions. So we do have a few that are coming in. I want to, encourage folks. We have quite a bit of time reserved that we can use if we get there. But if you have other questions or even comments about how you have implemented some of these strategies that Rebecca's talked about that you want to share, or anything like that, feel free to chime in, and we'll try to read them off if we can. And I'll start working through some of the questions we got, Rebecca, and I'm also going to see if I can unmute our director, Andrea Sparks, in case she wants to chime in with any questions as we go. The first one is really just a very practical one about some of the resources that you mentioned early on when you were talking about equipping folks, and you talked about some of the trainings that you all provide. They're just curious about accessing, and if there's a cost for those different trainings that you mentioned. I think you both said that Trafficking Truths was free, but the others?
Yeah, the spectrum is really broad in terms of cost. I mean, obviously a really advanced 2-day in-person training for law enforcement and vice school, it might carry a different cost than our Find Your Lane online 5-minute videos, right? So all of the costs vary. Trafficking Truths is free. Find Your Lane, right now is only $19. The law enforcement, we really custom build the training that each department needs, whether it's forensic interviewers in your child advocacy centers, or social workers, law enforcement, district attorneys, prosecutors. We really kind of try to specialize and customize the level of training that your department needs. So just email us and we can put a package together based on what you're looking for. And then our evolution of exploitation, I've been offering these in person, the evolution of exploitation, and we're currently working on actually filming it so that it would be available to any nonprofit and their staff. Especially be great part of onboarding if you're hiring new people or they're moving up, into director level positions or manager positions. It's going to be a really great component of onboarding for staff. And if you sign up for our newsletter, we will email you that as soon as it's ready to watch. We hope in the next month that we'll have it completely ready as an e-course, which are way more cost effective than bringing someone in up to your city, getting hotel, paying for travel, it can get, I know how that is. I run a nonprofit, so I get it. And obviously, anytime we're doing these, even though there is small fees, they always go back to the nonprofit. So it helps to keep our doors open too, and continues to go to a good cause of supporting survivors.
Perfect. And there's actually a couple other related to some of the things you just talked about. And I think you already touched on this, but there was a question about the 2-day advanced law enforcement training and whether that was only for law enforcement, but it sounds like it's up to the department if they want to pull in forensic interviewers or social workers or other sort of ancillary supports. So it sounds like maybe just work with your local law enforcement to reach out to get that training set up if there's an interest there. Is that right?
Yeah, and let me see, I'm gonna pull up if you guys want. I mean, we have time. I'm gonna pull up I bet it's on this computer. I'm going to pull up what all is entailed in our law enforcement training, and that way you can see, let's see here. Now you get to see my whole home screen, don't worry. So we have, with the law enforcement training, we do a variety of topics in that, so you can kind of decide what does or doesn't work for you. And that is, I'm just going to try to pull this a little bit. So typologies in criminal systems based on type of trafficking, investigation and prosecution tactics used nationally, innovative ways to arrest and charge. I got my control panel in the way. Arrest and charge victims without testimony. We're seeing a lot of innovative tactics used without victim testimony that investigators need. Trauma-informed interviewing techniques, determining culpability, brainwashing tactics employed, money laundering specifics, and then really the illusion of choice and what that means. So that's kind of the topics that we go through in an advanced 2-day training. And we have a lot of resources that come with that, investigators checklists, CEUs if needed. So hopefully that helps answer any questions on what that's included. If you feel like those are topics that your department needs, whether you are an active badge holder or not, feel free to reach out to us if you're like, we really want to know how to determine culpability because I work in probation or I work in child welfare. We want to talk about this. We want to hear about these processes. We're happy to come in and talk about things. We do want to be careful and respect. We've earned the respect of law enforcement because we don't share a lot of investigative undercover tactics openly with non-badge holders. That's why you see sometimes when people say it says badge holder only or closed only to law enforcement. When you start putting publicly out all of the ways that cops work behind the scenes cases, it starts to let, it gets out to the public and it lets bad guys know what to look for. So we want to be thoughtful around not disclosing too much too publicly.
Yeah, that's a great point. That makes a lot of sense. The question box was very quiet for most of your presentation, and then everyone just blew it up at the end when they realized we had time. Trying to filter through
what we want to do.
And a lot of these are actually people just celebrating the fact that you've moved to Texas. A lot of people saying, we're so happy to have you here. Glad you're finally here. Welcome to Texas.
Oh, I feel so loved by you guys. I really do. I told my husband, I'm like, everyone is so nice here. Everyone's been so great. It's really awesome.
We really want to embody the cliche of Southern hospitality. That's our hope.
Yeah.
I want to see if there were any more around the trainings. There's a question about, you talked about kind of finding your lane, which I think is such an important thing. Some people want to jump in and just do all of the things at once and really finding what that fit is, or maybe even what the need is in your community before you go and fill a need that's maybe already filled. But there was a question specifically about, do you have any thoughts about what lanes for men specifically might be? If you are male volunteers looking to get engaged in this space, any suggested activities or lanes for the guys?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I would start off by saying you're needed everywhere, for one. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear, and I can dive into some specifics, but I just want anyone to know, men are needed. Men are really needed at this table. We need your voice. This is not just a women's issue. This is a human issue. Demand is what fuels the issue of human trafficking. And so if we're not learning how to engage men in this discussion, we're not going to be able to tackle some of the cultural transformation that's needed in terms of objectification and hypersexuality, and just where that can lead to when that slippery slope of just how far sex for sale can go. You know, that's obviously why we're even having these conversations. But one of the things, a couple of things. One is, you know, I learned to have a lot of forgiveness for what had happened to me, because I had really good men in my life. My home director was probably the most profound mentor I've ever had. I had one of my first board members, who's like a, you know, dad to me today, one of the best men I've had in my life. Tom Perez from Epic, one of the best brothers. When I say like a dad, he's like, hey, no, call me an uncle or a brother. And so you bring a lot of healing with just you showing up and wanting nothing in exchange but to pour in and make a difference and be there to support and stand up for and open doors and invite us into spaces that we haven't been in. Like, you just doing that all in itself brings healing. And so I want to preface that. Some other areas I think are really needed is prevention. You know, at risk, vulnerable children leads to a lot of things, not just trafficking, but gang involvement, drugs, substance abuse, poverty, criminal justice system. High ACEs leads to a lot of foster care. It leads to traffickers. It leads to, it's not just the victimization that happens with vulnerabilities. You know, vulnerabilities are also what fuel victims, as well as buyers, as well as traffickers. And so when we can pull that needle a lot further and getting involved in your foster care system, getting involved in the juvenile justice system for people that are high risk for all of these varying things before trafficking, we need you there. We need you there to talk with young men about other options and about strengths-based approaches on what's available to them and what a good mentor can do in their lives. We also obviously need help in demand. We need men to be a part of that conversation and to show up and to hold other men accountable. We need you in policy. We need you to help write laws and lobby with us and show up at the courthouses when it's lobby day. I know Texas is in legislative session right now until May 31st. What bills are out there? What's happening? What do we know about? How can we get behind this? How can I leverage my circles of influence to sound the alarm on an issue and help people to vote in a way that's going to make a difference for victims? So there's so many ways. We need you everywhere, but those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd like to just make a plug as well, since I know you're doing a lot of work with New Friends, New Life up in North Texas. They have a program called Man-Kindness where they do a lot of
I should have mentioned it.
I've got you, Rebecca.
Thank you,
And so you might check that out. It's a educational resource geared mostly towards high school age boys. But since you also mentioned Tom Perez, who is like a personal hero of mine, I think Tom is so awesome. So I, before coming to the governor's office, was involved with a group called Demand Abolition and an initiative called Cease, which looks to disrupt demand for commercial sex. And one of Tom's amazing projects is the Epic Project, where they engage male volunteers to disrupt sex buyers online. And we took that Epic model and we're actually using their platform here in Texas. So our office,
I heard that.
Yes, our office has a grant. You know, we like to go big, so we couldn't just do one city. So we have Cease Texas, which is an initiative through a grant with children at risk. So if you have male volunteers or men's groups or anything, I would check out ceasetexas.org. They're engaging cyber patrols through the Epic Project model in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Central Texas, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, Corpus Christi. So that is one very practical way if folks want to bring it to their community.
I love that. And the Man-Kindness with New Friends, New Life, like you said, it's getting into high schools, talking to young men, men talking to young men, helping set that. So it's a lot of prevention there, ways to reach the next generation to change culture. So get involved and plugged in with Man-Kindness. And then if you want to disrupt demand, people might be saying, what does that mean? The Epic Cyber Patrols men volunteers show up. There's a script that actually was, I got to edit. I was really excited about. They asked me to come on early on years ago and give some feedback. I'm sure it's grown and they've brought in other people since then too, but it was one of the first projects we got to do was help with that. And so they will pretend to be, they'll put up an ad, and then men will call to purchase a human, and they'll get a chance to say, to talk to them. And so you're live on the phone with a buyer that thought they were about to buy a person. And it's tough work, but it's really great to see these cyber patrols. And they do it really well, and they have lots of really great technology and really well vetted scripts, and then what to do with the contact information. So you want to make sure to reach out to Tom and be a part of the CEAS Texas. That's really cool.
Yeah, we love that project. We have several questions that have come in specific to Elevate Academy. To get through a few of those. The first one is basically around, I guess, eligibility for the Academy. Is there two specific questions that have come in? Is it geared towards a certain age group of survivors? And is it open to boys, open to male as well as female, or what's sort of the eligibility, if there is one, for that academy?
Yeah, we'll serve any. There's really no eligibility other than it's typically geared towards 17 and older. Younger, they're not, getting ready to find a job, so it just doesn't necessarily irrelevant for the process or stage of life that they're in. It's not that, so that's why we usually say 17 and up. But yeah, male, female, non-binary, any age, any demographic, anything. I'll say the reason that Elevate started was because I remember when I ran from my trafficker, I fled home to Southern Oregon, little farm town where my mom lived, and I had zero services. I didn't have anything. And I can remember my community surrounded me, and I was so grateful, and I had a good family, but I was finishing school online because there's no universities there either. So you have to do everything online. And I remember one day it just hitting me, if I can get a master's online, I could mentor online. And I couldn't possibly be the only survivor who lived in a community where services didn't exist. And so that's originally how Elevate started, was for survivors in communities where there wasn't a drop-in center, where there wasn't a New Friends New Life, where there wasn't a Traffic 911, where there wasn't whatever organization you're thinking of in your town. What do we do for communities where there isn't that? What's accessible to survivors then? What happens when the drive's too far and they start missing group? How can we support them? And I think COVID has shown everyone that there's a lot you can do online. We've been doing this well before COVID, with originally the gear for just rural communities, but the demand grew and people wanted the classes because we were seeing that it's really focused on the now what, the next steps in life. I got through the program, I did the residential, I did the transitional, I'm on my own, and I really want to start dreaming about maybe what could my future look like. And so we want to partner them in that exploration process, and then partner them with the tools and the resources to actually fulfill those dreams.
That's amazing. And I love, you're right. That is, if there ever was a silver lining to everything with COVID and this pandemic, I think it's what we've learned that we're actually capable of and how we can utilize this technology. You were talking about CEAS and the EPIC project. We were kind of thinking, oh, maybe, with all of this, people won't be out in these transactions, and certain websites that were very popular here were getting shut down. And there was the tiniest of dips in March of last year when stay-at-home orders first rolled out, and very quickly that demand just rebounded right back to where
I bet.
it was. So
yeah, crazy. And a lot of online exploitation increased, too, or what you're not seeing necessarily out on a street corner or even in hotels or motels because of some of the sheltering orders, like you're saying, which is such a great point. There's a lot of online exploitation that has just skyrocketed. That's why I think we're seeing, the Pornhub Trafficking Hub campaign to bring down Pornhub is really, flourishing, because people are shocked. People are shocked at the amount of online exploitation that's existing right on our own regular web. It's not the dark web. This isn't something you have to dig for anymore. It's right out there openly. It's any social media. There's specific hashtags that show if someone is being sold, and people will go search for those hashtags when they get to another city. So everything's online, You don't have to look far anymore. You just have to know what to look for.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions that have come in sort of related a little bit more to victim services. This question is from a child advocate that it sounds like maybe has some experience serving youth that they know to be exploited. And she says, one of the difficulties that we have is that these youth often don't self-identify as victims. And Rebecca, you talked about that a little bit. Do you have any advice about how to speak to or work with these youth in order to get them to, quote, buy in to services when they maybe don't believe even that they're a victim?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And I see this, I mean, the reality is that very few victims self-identify until much further along in their recovery. And so relying, putting so much weight on someone self-identifying should not be that victim's responsibility, especially not a child's, right? And I know that's not part of the question, but just for other people, listening in, we can't make the responsibility on a child to learn what force, fraud, and coercion at point of recruitment and point of destination and the neurology of trauma. We can't expect them to know all that and learn all that and self-identify or not get services or legal help. And so that's our responsibility as service providers. It's our responsibility to interview well. It's our responsibility to know how to ask questions and make notes when we see fraud potentially used at point of recruitment, even if the victim doesn't see it that way. Sometimes we also have more information than the victim has. And so we had a case, for example, that the trafficker kept telling the victim that he was a fireman. That's why I had to go out of town so much. Well, dude was never a fireman. There's zero record of him ever being in the firefighting industry in any capacity. So a huge amount of fraud used at point of recruitment because it justified, the reason that he was leaving town so frequently. And so we knew that information. The victim did not know that information. And when we disclosed that, she didn't believe us for a while. No, that's why he told me. No. And finally, it was this moment of seeing almost the heartbreak of like, I've been tricked. He's not a fireman. He told me that, and it's just hard. It's hard. What I hope that service providers realize is just how hard it is for a young person, really any person, but I think especially a young person who hasn't had a fully developed cognitive reasoning response. It's hard for anyone to admit they've been conned, that I've been tricked, that you feel stupid, you feel embarrassed, you want to think, no, that can't be right. I mean, look, this happens with anyone. Look at what is his name, Bernie Madoff, when the Ponzi scheme. Those people were so embarrassed that they were tricked. This isn't just trafficking victims. Like anyone who is conned feels embarrassed, and it's really hard to sometimes digest what actually is truth when you're getting told it in the moment. So I think it's really important to not put the responsibility on the victim to learn all of those things when we're the ones that have gone through trainings, we're the ones that have been through school, we're the ones with the professional experience. We should be able to just talk to them, and it might take several different discussions to gain trust and relationship for them to begin disclosing some of their story. And as they do, you should be able to identify and mark where some of those are without a full-on identification and outcry disclosure of victim. It's very rare that it happens. I was like 2 years into my current marriage before I really started being like, oh my gosh, I am for sure 100% trafficked. And so think about that. Like it took me 2 years, so 3 years out of trafficking till I really hit me. Some ways you can encourage youth to get services until they self-identify is just incentivizing. You come here, every time you show up on time or every time you come to group, you get a point. When you get 4 points, we do this giveaway. Or, doing fun activities, food, clothing, laptops. I think, the Youth Resource Center at New Frenzy Left does a great job about incentivizing group attendance and make it fun, make it a party, make it a barbecue, make it a place that people want to come. And you'll see that it's going to be that healthy, safe place where they want to come. Just because we have time, I'm going to share this other very quick story kind of about that. We had a case a while back in California. It was a gang trafficking case, and the victim and the parents of the victim were also gang affiliated, and so it was very difficult for this victim to find any kind of supportive service. And unfortunately, it, anyway, so what she did was in the investigation, she ended up texting a teacher, and that always hit me. I don't know why it hit me so much, but it just always hit me that I thought there was not one safe person in this child's life. During her trafficking, her parents weren't safe because they were associated with the gang. They were being threatened discipline if they tried to step in and help their child. Just all of these layers. And this girl reached out to a teacher. Like, this is the kids reach out to who they know is safe, and just continue to build those relationships, and they'll continue to stay connected.
Well, I'm glad I'm not on video because I was tearing up a little bit hearing you talk about that relationship with the teacher. And, a lot of times when I give presentations on prevention, people want to know how they can plug in specifically to trafficking. They want to serve trafficking survivors or those at risk. And I think a lot of people underestimate the power and influence they have in the life of a child, especially just by virtue of whatever their role is as aunt, uncle, caring adult, youth minister, teacher, and just building that trust and that relationship is maybe not intended to be the work of anti-trafficking, but in reality, it's building a foundation that can be preventative, but also could be the trust that helps them to come to you when something goes wrong. So I love that you mentioned that. We had a question come in, and just since you talked about not putting the burden on victims to self-identify or to recognize their own exploitation, there was a question about whether you're familiar with the See It screening tool. And I just wanted to share for folks that aren't familiar, the See It is a validated screening tool that was developed in California, but it's a tool that we've chosen from the governor's office to help us improve identification around the state. And so to Rebecca's point, the tool is a quick sort of, you take the information that you know and you are able to objectively get a score. And if the score hits a certain threshold, it tells you you should have a clear concern for exploitation. And so by using that tool, we don't require the youth to outcry or disclose that the victimization has happened. We, in our training and use of the tool, presume that that kid could be a victim and take further assessment and steps. And I think that's really important, but I don't know, Rebecca, if you're familiar with that tool or have any comments on screening or identification, but I wanted to share because a question came in about that.
I love it. No, I'm actually not at all familiar with the See It screening tool. I'm excited to hear about it, and I'm really excited to learn more and get my hands on one. I know that you guys in Texas have modeled a couple things after Saving Innocence in California, and Saving Innocence is one of my favorite organizations. They've done just such a great job at really being trauma informed and survivor inclusive, and really continually growing with their content. And so I don't know where in California model you guys got that from, but it sounds really great. I think a screening tool is so needed. And I love seeing how people are using their skill set to advance efforts in our fields. I mean, this is a great example of when people say, where can I be of best use? Well, find a gap, find a gap in what we're see a need, meet it. And that's what we really need to do. We need to figure out how we can continue to advance our models, our modalities of care, our screening tools, there's so much work to still be done, and we can continue to advance our efforts. So I'm excited to learn about it.
We will be happy to to help you learn about it. I still see some questions coming in about getting access to some of the resources we've talked today, both from Rebecca Bender's initiative and some of the tools we talked about today. So like we said, we'll be sending out an email to everyone who registered that includes this presentation. And Rebecca has on the screen now contact information as well as the websites that have a lot of the materials she talked about, and we will be sending the toolkits that she mentioned as well. If you have questions about the See It, or as Rebecca said, our advocacy model here in Texas is based a lot on Saving Innocence model, and we've sort of texified it a little bit to make it work here.
You have to. You have to. You have to base it on your community. I mean, everything needs to be kind of customized a little bit.
Yeah, so we'll be sure folks also have a link to our website in the governor's office that has information about the screening tool, about that advocacy model, about some folks are asking about finding partners in their area. And you can find a lot of the services that we fund there.
Yeah. And we are sending the PowerPoint out as well as the PDF toolkit, so you'll get all of these slides. But yeah, the website elevate-academy.org is where you want to have survivors go learn about the school and sign up. RebeccaBender.org is all of the resources and training and education and what we call our equip arm. So if you just go to the resources, you'll see all of the trainings you can check out. There's free downloads. There's all the stuff there on the resource page. But this is the slide about the webinars that the Congressional Advisory Council is offering. Like I said, take a screenshot, but you'll also be getting this soon. And then the two names of the toolkits are here. Toolkit for building survivor-informed organizations, and then the best practices and recommendations for states. And those will both be going out to you in a PDF after this as well.
I think I'm personally registered for about 10 out of those 12 advisory.
Good.
So let's see.
So just so you guys know, on one of the, I can't remember which one, I think it's the law enforcement and prosecution. So J.R. Ujafusa is known as like the pimp slayer in all these prosecutors conferences. And he does a really good job at helping identify investigators' toolkits and whatnot. So if you're a part of law enforcement or prosecution, please sign up for that webinar. It's going to be really good.
We are getting really close to time, so I think we might have time for just one or two more questions. I'm looking here.
Okay.
A couple came in about sort of public awareness and social media. You talked about problems with sensationalism and, you know, a survivor that doesn't see themselves in a media campaign around trafficking, or a public that is educated about a problem that doesn't actually look that way in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a couple of questions about what folks on the call can do around that, and, you know, whether some of our anti-trafficking orgs even might unintentionally be contributing to part of that. Any recommendations for folks that want to help address that sensationalism problem?
Yeah, it's such a big one right now, and I too see, you know, people that that we're in the fight with that unintentionally use a variety of language and imagery that's really sensational and is, you know, again, leads to misidentification. You know, I will say that I found probably when I first started my organization, I had a brochure and I found it when packing up to move here. And it was literally one of the most sensationalized images I've ever seen. And I saw it and I started laughing and I was like, oh my gosh, I seriously did this. Like I did this. The person that teaches on sensationalism, I did it too. Like my first brochure also had the language and image. We all start somewhere. We all are in our own place of learning and growing. Anytime you have a relationship with someone, it's easier for them to hear some feedback of like, hey, I'm not sure that we really want to use this language or imagery. I will be the first to also admit that I haven't always done that well. I tend to tell people the opinion or like, hey, don't use that when I don't have any relationship. And that has definitely bit me in the butt several times. So I think building relationship with the nonprofits that are using sensational imagery and language and helping to hold them accountable and reminding one another, you know, we do have a responsibility as leaders in our community. We mantle that. We need to do it well. We need to steward our leadership well. And that means setting the bar and setting the standard and learning and educating. My free e-course, Trafficking Truths, there's one module specifically called Sensationalism. We have a really great 45 minutes on sensationalism, how to read reports, how to better understand a press release. I'll give you, I know we're going to be short on time. I just want to give one quick example of this. Recently, 33 victims announced found in Los Angeles. I was getting calls from my mother-in-law and everyone like, have you seen this? Da, 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 da. Well, I pull up the press release and they're not, the press release, the law enforcement agency is completely accurate, but the general public doesn't necessarily know the nuances and the details. And so when it said 33 people found in a trafficking sting, people are picturing 33 children in one room, maybe down in a basement in some trafficking, you know, where it's just 3 men outside with, you know, guns. And That's not what actually happened. And if you read, it says from Wisconsin, and or not from, but found in Wisconsin, found in Indiana, found in. So what happens for FBI is they don't want bad guys to talk. So they spend months planning a project, an operation, where they're looking for missing children, who, especially those who are at high risk of exploitation, from a screening tool that NCMEC, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, use. So they're identifying where missing children are, and then on one night, they're all dispersed in their county to go locate that missing child. So in one night, 33 agents are sent out in their county to find their one person that they've been looking at and following for months to find, that's on the high risk list. So it's not, now granted, those were specifically a California operation, although because some children were out of state, those agencies in that local state were identified, and they went to the location where the child was known to be. So that's a very different picture of having 33 agents dispersed to bring back California kids to their homes versus one home in California has 33 children in the basement. Does that make sense? And so I feel like our press releases are accurate, but the general public is still picturing something constantly. And so anyway, the sensationalism video on trafficking truths is really good. It's going to give you a lot of tools on how to talk about the right language, right images, how to read through research reports, how to better understand press releases, and how to just be a leader and continue to hold one another accountable.
Yes, you nailed it. I've seen a lot of those press releases too, and I see someone post on Facebook, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. And then I read it, I'm like, well, yeah, that's not actually quite exactly.
Yeah, it is unbelievable.
Yeah. We are right at the end, but people are still hanging on, and I just want to give time for one last question, just because I think it's an important one. So I'll let you answer that, and then I'll close us out. But the question comes from one of our partners that does help coordinate a multidisciplinary team and has all the partners coming at the table. And they said, a lot of times we just have so few placements for these kids, both foster care and community, and it can become really disheartening for the MDT members. They feel like we can't serve the kids how they need, or they're just going to run from this next placement. And they want to know if you have any recommendations for trying to help those MDT partners from giving up hope. They're doing really hard work every day, and it can become disheartening. So any words of encouragement or recommendations for helping folks not give up hope?
Yeah, it's so true. And I mean, it's hard. This is really hard work. And placement for children is one of the hardest things because we have laws with foster care that don't allow what's called mixed populations. So a non-foster placement cannot be placed in a private funded placement. So either everyone in that facility has to be foster, or everyone has to be privately placed, like by the parent. You can't generally have both. And I'm pretty sure that's most states. I'm sure someone on here might be like, well, in Texas, that's fine. Chat it in the box. We'd love to learn. I'm getting to know more and more about very specifics in Texas, but usually as a national trainer, that typically is placement's really hard because of just not allowing non-foster with foster and vice versa. I just want to say that your work matters so much. And I would encourage you, if you can listen to a variety of speakers who have this kind of lived experience. Keisha Head out of Atlanta is one of the best presenters on this topic I've heard. And she was in foster care, and she shares about just knowing that she always had someone safe really changed her. It wasn't going to be the first time or the second time or the third or the fourth or the fifth, but knowing there was always someone eventually helped her. And my husband and I took that approach when we took in a foster trafficked teenager, and she ran away all the time. If you've read my book, she ran away literally every single weekend. And it was a really hard year for my family, and she was not easy. She cussed me out and spit in my face, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. And it was really, really hard, but we just kept saying, when you're ready, dinner's on the table at 6. When you're ready, dinner's on the table at 6. And I learned that from Keisha, from her training. And I will tell you, every time that girl needs help, she calls me still. She's 22 and she's not doing amazing. She's not doing horribly, but to to still be able to have that relationship where she knows there's a safe space. And when she gets down on herself and she's like, why can't I just figure out? I say, girl, I didn't figure this out till I was 29. I didn't get out of the game and figure this out till I was literally 28, 29 years old. You're gonna do this. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna make this through. And so they really are relying on you. I know it doesn't feel like it when it's this constant revolving door, but you really are planting seeds. You really are making a difference. No, don't give up hope too soon. Oops, sorry, I got a phone call. Sorry, are we still there?
You're good.
So just don't give up hope too soon, and know that it is really making a difference.
I'm glad we took just a couple minutes for that last question, because I think that's a message a lot of people serving kids or anyone from hard places need to hear. So thank you for that. Thank you, Rebecca, for taking time to be with us today. Thank you for moving to Texas. But thank you for your expertise and your passion and for sharing such great information with us today. I did want to make a quick plug to everyone on the line for next month's webinar in our series. So it'll be on March 11th, also at 1 p.m., and we'll be hearing from Sonia Ryan. She's visiting Texas from Australia to advocate for prevention of online exploitation of children. Sonia actually lost her daughter to an online predator over 10 years ago, and since then, she's pushed Australia to become one of the top countries in preventing and responding to internet crimes against children. So we're very excited to hear about her prevention resources and ideas. As we mentioned, we'll be sharing this webinar recording and resources with you all in the coming days. And you can check out Rebecca's information here from this slide, and also our website at gov.texas.gov/CSTT for Child Sex Trafficking Team for more resources from our office. So with that, we're going to wrap it. And thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Todd. You're a great moderator.
Thank you, Rebecca.
All right, we'll see you guys.